Welcome to the Star Wars Canon Cantina, a show where we try to answer the question, who is Luke Skywalker before the release of Star Wars Episode 9? Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Jesse, and I am here at the Space Station Tulsa, Planet Oklahoma, with my friend Mike. How's it going, Mike?
It's going good, Jesse, the sex appeal Aiken. Mike, the hot take hammer here. Planet Utah's pretty good. I got to go snowboarding this past weekend, which is the earliest that we've been able to go since I moved out here. So that's fun.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. So that is it's your time of the year, Mike. That's your thing.
Absolutely.
Right? Where'd those nicknames and monikers come from? You just pulled out.
Well, I definitely didn't make them up, but I agree with them.
Okay.
And, we'll talk about them towards the end of the show, but it was too funny to not include in the opening.
That is so funny. I was not ready for that. So, guys, we have a really exciting topic today. We have one of the oldest Star Wars texts that ever existed, a story called Dark Empire. And I'm ready, Mike. I'm really ready to talk about this.
Yeah, so Dark Empire was a comic series that was later adapted into like an audiobook and stuff in 1991, written by Tom Veitch and illustrated by Cam Kennedy. And it's set pretty much right after the Thrawn trilogy. Jesse was telling me the other day about some weird like publisher struggles on timeline back when they were writing these, but this is vaguely set after the Thrawn trilogy, right?
That's right. And the history of Dark Empire is really interesting. There was basically no Star Wars content before this and the Thrawn trilogy, except those adventure stories with Han Solo and some of those side stories that never were canon, like Splinter of the Mind's Eye, the events that followed New Hope that are not canon, not even in the old Legends canon. So what they were trying to do was someone wanted to take up the Star Wars comics line because from my understanding, Mike, there had not been Star Wars comics, which were the Marvel Star Wars comics, since the, I guess, mid 80s.
Yeah, early to mid 80s, I think, right when the movies ended.
So about a decade of that. And so they got together in the late 80s and said, we want to start Star Wars comics again, and we want to start with after Return of the Jedi, what happened to the characters? And that's where these ideas started throwing around, and they talked with Marvel, and Marvel didn't work out. They actually ended up settling on Dark Horse Comics. And this is relevant, Mike, because this is our first Dark Horse comic on the show. And
that's
the
true.
Dark Horse Comics are a huge, huge part of the Legends storylines. This is the first
kind
of many.
It's kind of it's the first Dark Horse comic we both read, but for some of those other stories we've done, I ended up reading the Dark Horse adaptations of them. But first time we've both read the same one.
That's right. And I also mean this is the first Star Wars Dark Horse comic.
Yeah.
This was the beginning of all the ones. So yeah, you're right, Mike. You've read Shadows of the Empire now and the Thrawn trilogy and the Dark Horse comic format. Those of course came later after this. So what's interesting is they got together in the late 80s and started working on this, and they settled on this little company called Dark Horse Comics. And what's really strange is, of course, Zahn had been writing the Thrawn trilogy during this time. And there wasn't great coordination back then, as in Zahn was almost done, but they said, hey, we're about to release this comic and talk with Zahn and make sure it lines up. And they basically told Zahn, these are some decisions we made in the story. Change your book real quick. And he's like, no, that's not going to happen. So... which is great. I'm glad he didn't. And so they ended up basically asking Zahn for his outline, and they made a couple references to the Thrawn trilogy because this takes place immediately after, but in no way were these organized well, like in the old days, like today. And they weren't even organized the way Legends was the mid 90s onward, where actually a lot of the authors actually worked together, especially the New Jedi Order onward. Legends was actually pretty concise on what was going with the story next.
Yeah, there was definitely no story group back then.
No. So you're going to see a lot of inconsistencies in that, I think, from that. And also, Mike, I got to mention something I always experienced as a reader when I was younger in the 90s reading these was that I never perceived the comics as 100% canon. What about you? Like they just didn't feel like they treated them the same.
Yeah, obviously I didn't really think about what is canon and what isn't in such great detail back then, because we didn't have this defined split between, Legends and new Disney canon. Some of it was obviously not canon, like they had those kind of what if stories, but this I bought as pretty much canon.
Well, and we didn't have much back then, right? So this was kind of a big part of it. It's just strange because I think back then it was kind of understood that people read the major novels, but it was not understood that people read the comics. And I think
that's fair.
And I think the novels held onto that tightly. They didn't expect you to know what happened in the comics to understand a reference or something in the next novel. So I think it's just they were lesser grade. It's almost like they were kind of like Star Wars stories, not Star Wars trilogies.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot more sense than that. But I got to mention, Mike, before we get into the story, because we've got some fun history with this. They also created an audio drama for this. I'm not talking an audio book. I'm talking an actual audio drama that came out at the beginning of 1994. So 3 years after this came out in comic form. And in 1994, you and I listened to this together a lot.
Yeah, we did.
The audio. and it wasn't even released, Mike, on CD, compact disc, which is now, of course, a bygone standard. But it wasn't even released on compact disc until 1997. So you and I were listening to the cassette tapes of this.
The data tapes.
The data tapes, yeah. The Death Star plans. And I personally loved this audio drama as a kid because to me, I could not comprehend the idea of Star Wars content existing that wasn't just a book or an audio book, but something that was closer to the movies. Like, you know what I mean? So it was an audio drama, which was a hair closer to the movies. And the fact that a couple actors returned, like Billy D and things like that, even was more incredible for me back in the day. And, the audio drama holds up okay.
No, it definitely does. And as I was rereading the comic, I was hearing parts of the audio drama in my head.
So good.
Yeah, especially the lines from Emperor Palpatine.
That's right. The actor who played him was not Ian McDiarmid, but did a really good job. So that's our history on this. I just remember sitting in Mike's room and we listened to the tapes of this and the tapes of the Thrawn trilogy.
We had other friends, I promise.
Yeah, that's right.
They might have been imaginary, but we had other friends.
We had Nogri friends sleuthing around. But yeah, this is a pretty exciting story for us, and there's a lot of history in Star Wars. And of course, everything in Legends came after this in the Thrawn trilogy, so this is still something interesting to look at today, almost 30 years later, right?
Yeah, and almost 30 years later, I am ready to rip it to pieces like I do a lot of things on this show.
I'm shocked, Mike. I'm shocked. But let's go over our Luke questions real quick before we get into it. So if any of you guys are new listeners, I know we picked up a couple new listeners in recent weeks. We examined some questions about Luke Skywalker before we get into the story. And then we look at the story and Luke's decisions he makes and experiences he has, how those line up with these questions.
Yeah.
So the first question we have.
So for the past couple episodes, I made Jesse try out a different format with more questions, and we both decided that we like the original one better. So I appreciate the sex appeal's patience, and we're just going to go back to the original 3.
That's fine with me. So the first question is, what state is Luke in at the beginning of the story? The second question is, how do the events and characters of the story impact his development as a character? And lastly, would Luke Skywalker's experiences in the story make him different from the Luke that we meet in The Last Jedi?
All right, let's hop to it.
Ever since Luke disappeared, people have been looking for him.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
A lot of rumors, stories.
And I became a legend.
People that knew him best.
Luke. Young Skywalker.
Luke.
It's all true.
I am a Jedi. Like my father before me.
All of it.
So, addressing our first question, this might be the most interesting way we find Luke in any legend story that we've read. He's not alone meditating or off with R2 or hanging with Han and Leia. Nope, he's just crashed a Star Destroyer on Coruscant. Great job, Flyboy.
Yeah, and we see traces of other stories in this, Mike, because this mainly made me think of something we did months back now, Shadows of Mindor, where Luke's starting in a Mon Cal cruiser, a mission. He's on the command crew, and he crashes on the planet because he got caught in all those wells right around the asteroids.
Oh, that's right.
And what's interesting is that story. I liked kind of that story, Luke, better than this story, because in that story, almost everyone dies despite Luke's best efforts landing the ship, similar to how Anakin does in Revenge of the Sith. But the ship, he just can't control the landing fully, and most of the people die, if you remember that. And Luke had a lot of regret and existential guilt from that immediately at the beginning of that story.
Yeah, but we don't care about that story anymore.
No, this time it's all action. This is the I mentioned last week, guys, get your popcorn out. This is the popcorn Star Wars story. What's cool about this story is him and Lando are on this cruiser together, and yeah, you're right. There's a giant battle happening on Coruscant immediately after the events in the Thrawn trilogy. The Empire's trying to take over Coruscant, like they do, and they crash right on the planet.
Or no, I think this is the Empire resisting losing Coruscant still. It hasn't
remnants.
Quite been taken over by the New Republic yet, but there's these different factions within the Empire fighting each other and scavengers and
see, that's already inconsistent, Mike, because in the Thrawn trilogy, the New Republic basically has control of Coruscant, because I mean that's where Borsphalia and Mon Mothma and all those characters are, and Akbar, right? So
that's true. Well, maybe I had it backwards, but again, action comic, loosely canon, ever.
Right. Clearly, I mean, Coruscant's going to be a contention point, and a lot of our stories going onward. Don't be surprised if it gets attacked again.
Yeah, for real.
Center of the galaxy.
So Luke has crashed a ship, and he has to be rescued by Han again.
That's right. So apparently, Lando and Luke are on Coruscant for days, fighting in the wreckage of the ship with all their rebel troops. And Luke just kind of disappears into the planet, like further in the tunnels out of nowhere. He senses a presence. He senses a dark force. So once again, a reference to the dark side being cold and a feeling, a looming presence that you can feel. And Luke is drawn to that, Mike, and he goes deeper into the planet in these tunnels. And he discovers some interesting stuff. Let's just start there. And I like this is the start of this story actually a lot with Luke.
So we first actually see Luke when he's emerging from these tunnels on Coruscant, right?
In the comic, I think.
Yeah, no, that's the first time we see him. He's come out. They intentionally silhouette him like Vader, but it's really just long hair and a popped collar. And then Luke has apparently learned a crap ton since the Thrawn trilogy, because an AT-AT shoots him, and he essentially, according to the comic here, turns on some deflector shields. He doesn't even block the bolts with his lightsaber. There's just this blue glow around him that deflects the shots back.
Let me back up. This is pretty interesting, Mike. This is a good example of text. So let me preface and say, this time I did re-listen to the audiobook, and I skimmed over the comic, more than skimmed, but I read most of the comic again. Mike, you read the comic, right?
Just the comic, yeah.
So the audiobook immediately picks up with Luke in the tunnels with R2.
Oh, yep. Don't have any of that here in the comic.
And it's personally one of my favorite parts of this storyline. It's really unfortunate it's missing from the comic. And something we haven't mentioned yet with the comic was really well received. This actually did really well. But there's parts of this story that are clearly missing, and that was a choice from the author. He said he liked characters doing things off screen, and he assumed the audience would understand all of it. But after its reception, even though people enjoyed this comic a lot, people asked a lot of questions like, what was Luke doing here? What was happening here? And this is a great example of that. So in the audio drama, Luke is in the tunnels and he finds one of Palpatine's storehouses, similar to what we've seen in now the Thrawn trilogy, and kind of what we've seen a little bit in the Marvel comics, where Luke kind of found the Hutt's store of Jedi things. This is kind of that sort of scenario again, Mike.
We've also seen it in the Battlefront 2 story mode.
That's right. So Luke actually finds a recording of Palpatine teaching the ways of the dark side, essentially Palpatine's attempt at making a holocron. And Palpatine even says that he's attempting to make a Sith holocron to train people in the ways of the dark side. And what's interesting, Mike, is this is the first time the word holocron is mentioned in Star Wars. So once again, something that has become canonized from this point onward, even though it's been changed.
The original holocrons looked more like the Tesseract from the first Avengers movie than
definitely,
and Captain America than the holocrons we got in Rebels.
But in the audiobook, Luke experiences a lot of emotions listening to Palpatine, and then he basically starts saying, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't listen to this, but then he kind of gets drawn in by Palpatine's words. It's almost like Palpatine's presence, even though Palpatine is gone, still has a sway through the dark side. And Luke spends 6 days down there, Mike, reading and listening to these holocrons.
This
so that
is
should give
the
you some context.
stupidest Luke we've ever seen.
Luke would not do this.
No.
That's what you're saying. Probably not. No. Even if he was manipulated, he would probably find a way. And actually, they do reference that in the audio drama a little bit. R2's trying to get him to pull away, but he can't. Like he's kind of like hypnotized, vampire glamored, whatever you want to call it. It's happening to Luke. And you're right. There is a really iconic scene though, on this point onward. I mean, and the sense of what this comic is known for, what the audio drama is known for. So Lando, Han, and Leia are all pinned down on Coruscant by battle droids, which again, the first reference to battle droids, and Imperial troops and Imperial walkers. And you're right, Luke comes out and they intentionally make the silhouette look like Vader. And he comes out, deflects and defeats the battle droids. And
he just defeats the battle droids by like waving his hand and they explode. Luke is like all powerful at the beginning of this comic, which is a huge jump chronologically from what we've seen.
That's true. But we do got to mention some callbacks and references. You know, they obviously pull what they like in Legends and in the new canon. And maybe some of this is that, but I mean, it's like, I literally see Luke in this walking out in front of the walkers, which is very similar to Last Jedi, but the way Luke in this handles it is not like Luke in the Last Jedi, right?
So I'm willing to put money on, yes, Rian Johnson had read Dark Empire, and it had zero impact on his decision-making in The Last Jedi, is what I'm willing to put money on. It's not a callback to Dark Empire. I think it's just they're both kind of using a cool Star Wars setting.
You don't think Luke walking out of a wreckage tunnel into in front of a bunch of walkers is a flip on its head of a callback?
No,
because obviously the
Dark Empire is like that. This is not Luke. Like even in the context of the Legends stories. No.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying though. Like I'm saying, like I think it's what Rian Johnson was doing a lot, which is people thought Luke was going to come out, with the laser sword and cut down some walkers or bring them down with his force, and instead he does none of that.
Well, okay, if you're going to get that broad, then maybe. But I'm just saying, I don't think that Dark Empire had an impact on those decisions.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Well,
I like that visually it's the same, but the outcome is completely different. And to me, that says more. Like in a way, knowing Rian Johnson and what he did too, that almost says more
we're
I'm
Twitter
taking this
best friends
visual
with
cue.
Ryan. We'll just ask him.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I'm taking this visual cue that people have known for 30 years almost, and
But
I'm gonna turn on its head.
even diehards don't know the visual cue from Dark Empire. It's so old and so bad.
No, I think this is the one scene people know from this. So
No,
like I think
people know the World Devastators and stuff like that.
See, I don't know, because I distinctly remember the audio drama and Luke coming out on this part, and great acting by the way, from Billy D. And Billy D's like, Lando's basically freaking out because Luke's knocking the walkers down, and he's like, what is happening? And Lando's kind of scared.
Okay, so us and our imaginary friends and a few other people who focused on the audio drama as kids might have that as the most important point, but it's really not the most important point of the story, and not the most memorable Luke moment.
I just think I think maybe this caused some misconception in people's minds. It was the beginning of misconceptions about Luke and his powers, because it's like, hey, you want super powerful Luke on one of the first sources of Star Wars, which, by the way, notice Luke is not like this in the Thrawn trilogy at all. He's pretty consistent with Return of the Jedi Luke.
No, he's not.
Yeah, he is.
Return of the Jedi Luke wasn't bringing... Oh, you mean in the Thrawn trilogy. I'm with you. I thought you were saying this was. Okay. I was like, no, you're exactly
I'm agreeing
wrong.
with you.
Yeah, okay.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying he's inconsistent with Return of the Jedi Luke and Thrawn trilogy Luke.
I gotcha.
Just by coming out looking like Vader and just destroying these walkers, even though it is a cool image.
Okay, well, we've spent too much time talking about this scene. We got to get moving.
Well, this is, there's not a lot of Luke scenes that are, this shocking, but we'll move on from this. And, there's stuff that happens with Han and Leia at this point onward, but Luke starts scaring them. But what happens next is
his dialogue
so
is
sci-fi.
Yeah, it's so sci-fi, and his dialogue is so out of character.
He's very removed, and even they did that in the audiobook drama. The voice is like, Luke's voice audibly changes. It's flat and just cold. But what happens next is after Luke defeats all these Empire guys, he tells the rebels to leave. He says, leave him. And they say, why? He says, just leave me here. And this giant sci-fi force storm comes and lands on the planet right on top of where Luke
hyperspace
is.
Wormhole created by the Force that destroys some of the Republic ships in orbit.
And goes all straight to Luke. It goes straight to Luke.
Yeah.
Very
It doesn't want
strange.
you, it wants me. Leave or you'll all be destroyed. And Leia's like, no, we are Jedi. We are brother and sister. And then they leave.
They leave.
So
Han's like, nah, we're leaving.
I'm looking at the full page panel before Luke meets this hyperspace wormhole. We haven't talked about the art from this series yet.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the artist first, because I think it'll give some context to this, Mike. So I did some digging on him. Since the art is so different and original. Cam Kennedy is the artist for the Judge Dredd series, which I'm not super well versed on. I obviously know the character, I know the movie, I know some of the comics, but that makes this make a lot more sense. Does that make, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because the characters are trash, but when compared to modern Star Wars comic standards, they're bad.
The character realization, yes. The art is great.
No,
in my
it's
opinion.
not. So
yeah, I think it is.
No. The characters are weird, but what is great
weird
is all of the technology, droids, ships, even aliens.
Very heavy metal.
Good.
It's very heavy metal looking. The 80s comics. Yeah, and I got to mention the coloring too, Mike. It's very unique coloring. It's watercoloring, and it's very simple tones, monochromatic meets greens and blues, and not a lot else. It's
reds.
very different.
Yeah,
the lightsabers are white in this, pretty much.
It's a stylistic thing, and I don't have any issues with the coloring of it. And like I said, the metal stuff all looks really good, but I just think none of the characters look right.
I don't think they look right for sure, but this artist definitely took I'm doing my art style on Star Wars. I'm not trying to curate hyper realistic Star Wars, and I give cred there. It's different. I don't know. I like this better than some of the CG looking art, if you know what I'm talking about, Mike, and recent comics.
Mm-hmm.
But that's about it. I really like the watercolor a lot, though. The coloring is definitely not modern coloring. It's more, I don't know, like a painting. But the art is strange, but it makes a lot more sense thinking the Judge Dredd universe, the dark stuff, and some of that heavy metal comic influence, anime influence, maybe with some of the metal robot stuff. But yeah, you're right. It's worth mentioning.
Yeah, so this storm swallows Luke up, and he's gone for a little bit. And we eventually learn some other context for what's going on with the New Republic as a whole. Like, they are starting to take over all these planets back from the Empire. They're starting to spread, but then we find out that the planet Mon Cala is under attack, and the comic is very direct with its dialogue to make sure that why that's where Admiral Akbar is from.
Yeah, they're like,
Admiral, how do you feel about this?
1991. It's like people might not be that invested in the nerdiness of Star Wars,
Which I get it. It's just very on the nose.
Yeah, and I think it's our first direct view and reference to Mon Cala in a book form, so that's kind of neat. We obviously knew the Mon Calamarian people, and Akbar is featured pretty heavily in the Thrawn stuff, but yeah, it would make sense for the Empire to strike here because this is where the rebels create their Mon Cal cruisers, the shipyards, and for all that. And the Mon Cala people have been one of the longest allies of the Republic, and they make that clear in the comic too.
Yeah,
they're like, we've been there since the beginning. So, but they attack, Mike. They attack with these super weapons called World Devastators,
which Lando, in a convoluted way, describes as why these are more dangerous than the Death Star ever was.
Yeah, yep. And Billy D delivers all those lines, but essentially everyone in the New Republic goes to deal with that now that Coruscant's kind of under control. They go deal with that
World
battle.
Devastators are giant black mobile vacuums that have like one vacuum intake and 4 legs propelling them. Is
right.
Sort of a way.
They're kind of like these world terraformers, reverse terraforming sort of thing, and they destroy worlds and resources from the worlds, and then this is so sci-fi, Mike. And then with the resources they suck up from the planet, they churn out like basically Empire vulture droids, which are just crappy, disposable, AI controlled TIE fighters.
Yeah, these TIE drones.
Right. That's a good way to call it. And so think of the vulture droids in the prequels, less effective than those. So, but they just churn them out en masse. And you know what's interesting, Mike? I thought of something the other day, which once again, maybe taking things from Legends and making them better in the new canon. But there was an episode in Star Wars Rebels where the Empire had these not super weapons, but these big ships that sucked up stuff and created fighters.
I don't remember those. I'm not doubting you, but I was remembering towards, I think in season 4, they had big mobile mining factories.
I think that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I don't think those were Imperial controlled because, in fact, I know they weren't because Ezra was fighting a Trandoshan in a lot of it.
So they were like slaver controlled?
Yeah, like mining guilds or slaver smuggler people.
So that's interesting. But so there's a huge battle on Mon Cala for all this. And, this is pretty well known visually, Mike, in these comics, because as you said, this features mini panels of machines and ships fighting, and it looks really cool.
Yeah,
it looks really cool. So great double panel things and all things like that. And then at the same time, Han and Leia and 3PO and Chewie go off on an offshoot mission like they always do on Nar Shaddaa, the Smuggler's Moon, which now, of course, is canon again in the Marvel comics. And, they do a lot of stuff that's kind of filler, but it's filling out the smuggler side of the universe.
Yeah. Well, and their motivation is to get to Luke and figure out how to get physically to him. And this is where we can hop back to Luke.
He's with R2, by the way.
Yeah, Luke and R2 have been taken by an old Sith era slaver ship to the deep core of the galaxy, the planet Biss, BYSS. And
this will come up again too.
Yeah.
This will come up again.
And he gets taken to meet the Imperial Master, and oh hey, look, it's Palpatine again. And he goes off on his villain monologue about how the body that Luke saw destroyed wasn't his first one. He exists as dark side energy, and it uses up these human hosts, so he's just got all these clones. And then Luke gets really, really stupid.
Yeah, basically Palpatine does the whole Return of the Jedi thing to Luke again. He says, look out the window at all my view screens of Mon Cala and these other Republic worlds that are being destroyed by the World Devastators. Join me and I'll save your friends and go commit fully to the dark side and I'll spare them, basically. That's the audiobook drama version. I'm sure the comic version is even faster.
I don't even remember him offering to save his friends. I think that Luke is like, oh, well, this is a convincing argument. I'll join the dark side and fight it from within because that seems like a good idea.
Right. Luke's like, I can confuse Palpatine from here if I'm his new Vader. Which, maybe that could work in some universe, but that doesn't seem like Luke, really. Yeah, that's kind of the biggest thing.
It's not.
That seems like a Han thing. It seems like a Han thing, honestly. If Han had Force powers, he'd be like, yeah, man, start teaching me Force lightning and stuff. and I'll kill you with it. But a lot of great interactions with Luke and Palpatine here, mainly because of Palpatine. Palpatine in this form, I will say that. Palpatine at this point in the story is pretty consistent with the Palpatine we see in Return of the Jedi, but
it's because it's the exact same Palpatine we saw in Return of the Jedi.
Line for line.
Pretty much.
But it is interesting for Luke to watch as kind of the New Republic's failing here. Meanwhile, during this, Luke does do some heroic things behind the scenes. When Palpatine's not around, Luke downloads the schematics for the World Devastators into R2. So I'll mention that. And he obviously has a plan to stop the World Devastators from there. But you're right. Luke's even recognized as like Lord Commander at some point.
Supreme Imperial Commander.
That's right. Palpatine sends out an email to everyone or something and says, your new Lord second in command is CC'd in this email. Give him full respect. And Luke leverages that.
So that's hilarious. And it makes the questionable timeline of these World Devastators suddenly answering to Luke Skywalker even better. I like that.
Yeah. So what happens next, Mike, with them answering to Luke Skywalker? Let's just jump right into that.
Well, so the battle's raging on. The New Republic isn't doing very well. Lando is crashing a second Star Destroyer into a World Devastators factory.
It's pretty cool, actually. That part's pretty cool.
Yeah, not a good display of Lando's piloting ability. And then Darth Vader appears to Leia.
That's right.
Except it's not Vader. It's Luke, because he had to be scary, and he's doing a force projection. First is Vader, and then the mask goes away. Or maybe it's not Luke doing this. I think it starts as Luke trying to talk to Leia, like, hey, don't come find me. And then the Emperor takes over and he's like, ha ha ha, I've got your brother.
Yeah. Kind of like a Snoke interfering sort of thing.
Yeah.
Catching the Skype call and messing with it. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting too. Luke kind of force projecting himself in a way, or kind of doing the Skype call thing we see now is canonized and made better. Interesting. But he basically tells Han and Leia, like, hey, I know you're on my trail and you're trying to find where we are, because once again, Luke's on some unreachable world on this Biz planet. And he's like, don't come find me. But Han and Leia ignore that.
Yeah, so they end up going to Nar Shaddaa to get basically a ship with the clearance to go to the deep core, which is still heavily Imperial controlled. Right. They meet up with Salla, Salla.
Yeah.
Han's ex-girlfriend, who is quite similar to Sana, his fake ex-wife from the comic series. And they end up taking the Falcon aboard a bigger ship called the Starlight Intruder to get to Biss to try to rescue Luke.
That's right. And so meanwhile, this is happening. The New Republic's almost fully destroyed. And Luke takes control of the World Devastators, right, Mike?
Well, just since I know you and a lot of our listeners are big fans of bounty hunters, I will press pause on advancing the Luke stuff to give this tangent. This is the first time we see the reintroduction of a Mr. Fett. Mr. Fett here to see you, sir. Mr. Fett here to see you, sir. Han basically goes into his old apartment. This droid keeps repeating, a Mr. Fett to see you, sir. And Han goes, what? And Boba Fett and Dengar are waiting for him.
Right. So once again, we see that Dengar being featured heavily in the Marvel stuff and Boba Fett being featured heavily in the Marvel stuff, which is now canon. That was how it was back then too. Dengar and Boba Fett are kind of buddies, and they're featured a lot in this stuff, Mike. And you're right. We have hijinks with them.
And
we have conflict.
They prove again to be incompetent at catching that blasted Solo. They're like Wile E. Coyote trying to catch the Roadrunner.
Yeah, Boba Fett does not do well in this once again.
Yeah,
so
he misses a rocket shot and shoots a Hutt's hover sled and all this stuff.
Yeah, then a Hutt falls down a cliff, which is great. I needed that imagery. So that's fun. Oh, and we didn't mention this yet too, but something I thought was kind of a cool thing, probably consistency, is everyone on Last Jedi is looking for Leia because she has a huge bounty on her head from the Hutt cartel because she killed Jabba.
And
so
that
cool.
shows up again in, I think, Bloodline. Not necessarily that all the Hutts are after her, but she's got the reputation as the Hutt Slayer, which is pretty cool.
I love it. So yeah, I appreciate you mentioning the bounty hunters. No Bosk or IG-8 though.
Yeah.
And this
Boba Fett has the Slave 2, which looks really stupid. The Slave 1 was way cooler.
That's right.
But basically, they Boba Fett and Dengar fail at catching Han and Leia. They get away on the Starlight Intruder and make their way to Biss with Han's ex-girlfriend to rescue Luke.
Yep, that's a good summary. And so back to the World Devastators. Luke and R2 turned them off, right? They shut them down from the command center.
I don't think that happens quite yet. I think that happens when Leia gets there, because we see the E-Wings, the newest fighters for the Republic, show up and start trying to attack the World Devastators, and they have more powerful weaponry, and they're starting to make a dent in them, or so it appears. I think this stuff all kind of happens at the same time, but this is the introduction of Knave Squadron, Knave, and the E-Wings. Which, if you played the Rogue Squadron video game for Nintendo 64, I think the last or bonus level was taking out the World Devastators.
The Battle of Mon Cala.
In a V-Wing airspeeder, so wrong ship, but same video game level.
Yeah. And they kind of pull from the design in this comic, be Nintendo 64 graphics, but they do that. They try to pull visually from this. But yeah, you're right. Han and Leia and Chewie and 3PO all get to Biss. I would say that's the next notable part.
Yeah, they get there and then they're immediately captured and taken to Luke, and he's like, "No, guys, it's me. I'm taking down the dark side from the inside."
Right. And they're like, "We don't know you anymore. You look like Vader. You're becoming your father." All this stuff. And Luke's scaring them.
Leia draws her lightsaber, which the comic calls her a great Jedi warrior, which I was like, oh, no, she's not. Not even in Legends continuity was she established as a great Jedi warrior.
No, she defended herself a little bit in the Thrawn trilogy, which was fine, but nothing crazy. You're right. So,
yeah.
And I haven't mentioned this yet, Mike, but it's finally time. I know I mentioned this in the last episode, but Star Destroyer scale. So let's talk about the Eclipse.
Oh,
The Eclipse is the new resurrected Emperor Palpatine's Super Star Destroyer. And this ship looks different. It looks kind of neat. I will say that.
Oh, I really dig how this ship looks, actually.
This is actually one of my favorite parts of this comic for sure. It's something I've never forgotten about. And so much so that when I actually read the end of the Aftermath series, they kind of referenced a new Super Star Destroyer. Remember, because at the end of the Aftermath series, they're going to the deep. deep, deep space, and they're starting the First Order and all that stuff. And they have a Super Star Destroyer that sounds very similar to this. This one's probably a little bit more outlandish, but it's big. It's big, Mike, and it's black, and it is like really aggressive looking, and it dwarfs, like, Star Destroyers are like little blips next to it, I guess is the way to call it.
Yeah. But it looks super cool. But we basically have the heroes confront Palpatine, and Palpatine
This is on the Eclipse.
This is on the Eclipse in classic bumbling villain fashion. He doesn't kill Han and Chewie. They get imprisoned. So of course they're going to escape later. Leia tries to fight back, and she gets force lightninged, and Palpatine sort of reveals then that, yeah, Luke being, my new Vader is nice, but you're the real prize. And they reveal that Leia is pregnant with their third kid.
That's right. He's like, I can sense him. So, but at this point, Leia turns Luke back. I'm saying this in quotes. Leia gets basically helps Luke snap out of it a little bit, redeems him, I guess. She helps Luke snap out of it. She steals the Emperor's holocron that he is expositioning villain style to her with, and they escape. Basically, the Falcon catches him at the last second in true Star Wars fashion, and they leave. But what about Luke and Palpatine's boss fight? That whole thing.
But what about what?
Luke and Palpatine's boss fight with lightsabers and Palpatine.
Oh, that hadn't happened yet.
Do it.
That hasn't happened yet because
we have to. That happens after this. Is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay, yeah. So this is something that I would believe. In fact, I think I saw Ryan Johnson directly reference this on Twitter. Luke leaves, and they're all talking about plans, and Luke's sort of disconnected from the conversation. He's like, I'm glad you're safe now. I can't come back. Here's how to defeat the world devastators. And then they're like, what do you mean? And he says, very simple. I'm still on Biss. And then he disappears. So he's used the Force to project himself across space-time, and just like he did at the end of Last Jedi. Except it didn't kill him.
I love this story point, Mike, because Luke's actually been on Biss the whole time with Palpatine, and he makes them, all his best friends, his family, think that they're out of there, they're away, and Luke's like, no, for the greater good, I'm staying behind, and I tricked you guys, but to protect you, and you guys are free, you're safe now.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
No, it is. And for people who remembered this story when they saw The Last Jedi, they were like, oh, well, I guess not everybody, but a lot of people were like, oh, that's cool.
I did. Yeah.
It's he's projecting himself across space like he did that one other time. Except he didn't, die in Dark Empire by doing it.
Right.
Yeah. So Han and Leia, Chewie the Falcon, they go back to Pinnacle Base, which is where they were launching these strikes against the world devastators from. And now Luke thinks he's alone. He thinks he won't have any distractions, so he can turn on Palpatine. And Palpatine threatens to just take over his body, transfer into it. And Luke's
right.
And Luke's like, well, I see all your naked clones, Rick and Morty style, lining the walls of this chamber. I'm just going to start slashing all of them. And Luke gets them all except one, and then there's just creative shading for about 10 pages to hide a naked young Emperor Palpatine fighting Luke.
So Palpatine switches into one of the young Palpatine bodies, right?
It is very Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty.
Oh gosh. Yeah, and they have their boss fight in this clone chamber, and this is I think a lot of people remember at least the images from this. Like, you're right, the naked young Palpatine that looks nothing like Palpatine. It looks nothing like Palpatine looks.
He's still covered in his like green clone vat goop, and he's shaded
once again, man. This is way more like heavy metal animes comic than Star Wars comic, but this was the first foray into this, and the guy they got, it does darker stuff. So it's just funny. We wouldn't see this in the new Marvel series.
Oh God, no.
We wouldn't see naked Sith guy fight, even if it's not Palpatine, just naked Sith guy fighting in clone chambers. But you know, some of the set pieces are really cool here, Mike. The clone chambers and the machinery around them and stuff. But yeah, they fight lightsabers and everything, right? Popped collars, Count Skywalker versus Count Palpatine here. That's what I think every time. I'm like, dang.
That's funny.
You know, and some I've noticed in this, Mike. Am I wrong to say that Luke's lightsaber in some of these scenes is red and Palpatine's is blue?
Well, I am colorblind, so I'm probably not the best person to ask about that.
Okay,
they both,
couple of these images right in front of me. That's the case. So I
what
think
I'm
that was
looking at, they're
intentional.
mostly just kind of white or bluish for both of them.
Yeah, whitish. But yeah, the boss fight, right? So,
And Luke loses the boss fight. Palpatine subdues him
time.
again, and I want my holocron, and I want your sister's child. I'm going to crush the rebellion once and for all.
that's right.
He's
Yeah,
really
Palpatine
leaning
thinks.
into that mustache twirling cartoon villain part here, which
Right.
I'm totally cool with, by the way. Like, these were the parts of the audio drama that I could hear as I was rereading them, and I was like, oh yeah, good times.
Yeah, this stuff is really good in the audio drama. I really enjoy it. So he creates a giant force storm again, right?
Well, not quite yet, because right after we see Luke defeated again, this is when the rebels succeed against the World Devastators. They basically learn to control them and turn them on each other. And how do you destroy an indestructible machine with another indestructible machine? So they save the planet Mon Calamari, and then this massive fleet from the Deep Core and Biss shows up at Pinnacle Base while most of the rebel defenses are out fighting the World Devastators. And Palpatine's like, you know what, rebels? I hate you guys. I don't even care. Just give me Leia and I'll leave.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm sick of this too. Just give me the girl and I'll get out of here.
That's right. Because he wants Leia and her new child.
Yeah, which, if I didn't make it clear, he ultimately wants to train the child and then transfer into his body, which is super creepy.
Super creepy. Yeah. Yeah. And we didn't mention it, but the twins are safe. Jason and Jaina.
Oh, yeah. So they're already born, which I don't think they were at the end of The Last Command, the last book of the Thrawn trilogy. So,
no, they were. Remember? We had the chapter.
No, I don't remember. That's why I said that I didn't think they were born.
No, they were born. That's the good part. But we definitely didn't know about, Leia being pregnant with a, this is sometime later, but not much.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I do remember the weird comic panels of Leia giving birth now.
That's right. Yeah. You were like, that was really quick in the comic. I was like, oh, they devoted like a whole chapter of Han and Leia character stuff to that.
Yeah.
Her giving birth. But so yeah, bad guy stuff. Force storm.
Yeah. So
Palpatine
when he's
stuff.
there and they refuse to turn over Leia, that's when the Emperor's like, well, I'll just get angry and use my Force hyperspace wormhole thing to
destroy
crush
the
everyone.
entire rebel fleet, rebel base, all that. So
Yeah.
and then we have a Luke and Leia moment coming up.
So Leia, she allowed herself to be taken, I guess, to what's the ship called again? This big Star Destroyer?
The Eclipse.
The Eclipse, yeah. She allowed herself to be taken there, but obviously wasn't going to surrender. This is where she talks Luke into snapping out of it. After they have a brief exchange of lightsaber swings.
Right.
And then they Wonder Twins it up to take over the Emperor's Force Storm, basically.
Yeah, they basically wrest control of the storm from Palpatine, and they control it. And the power of, family and love and all this stuff, they take control, and he is not happy about this. Very Palpatine-esque. He never saw this coming.
He actually says, "Curse you, Skywalkers! I'll tell you the truth about your father. The great Darth Vader was a sick man in an iron mask," which I actually thought was a really cool line.
Yeah, that's really well delivered in the audio drama. That's really well delivered.
But then, they use the power of love and friendship and the light side to turn the Force storm on the Imperial fleet. They destroy it and they escape, and we move on from there. That's glossing over some of the detail of it, but again, we don't want to cover every single thing. We want you to be intrigued enough by the story to find this and go read it yourselves.
Yeah, I want to read the last line here, Mike. It's to me always been strange and slightly ominous, but we didn't mention this whole story. Luke kind of has the Sith eyes going on, and I guess this is before the Sith eyes were canonized, but he has the Sith eyes, and once Palpatine, the Eclipse is destroyed with Palpatine on it, Luke is on the Alliance cruiser with Leia and Han, and he kind of snaps out of it, and his eyes turn again to their regular blue color, and he has a quote here: "The Jedi Knights will rise again." And it almost seems ominous, but that's the last line of the story, and Luke has a very determined face on.
Yeah. So this comic is great for what it was, introducing Star Wars to comics almost 30 years ago. My opinion, it does not hold up art-wise or story-wise at all. And honestly, I think the World Devastator and Republic battle is fine and pretty well done. I think Luke is by far the weakest part of this story.
Lando's pretty fleshed out in this, which is pretty interesting. I know we didn't spend a ton of time on him.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
He
But
has as much screen time.
Luke by far brings this down, I think.
Luke is weak in this, Mike, but he is featured heavily, which is something.
Well,
it's interesting.
If you're going to feature him heavily, do it right. So let's hop back to our questions. We kind of talked about the first one already. He crashed the Star Destroyer. I'd forgotten about his specific exploits in the dark side
tunnels.
Cave on Coruscant, but he's still learning. It's weird. They present this parallel of Luke is learning about the Force, but he's also powerful enough to just take down AT-ATs by waving his hand.
That's right.
Yeah, it's real weird. So Luke doesn't have a whole lot of interactions with side characters in this story. Like he interacted with Talon Card and Mara Jade and the Thrawn novels. He's mainly just with Palpatine and Leia and Han in this story, right?
That's right. Yeah, and R2, of course.
And
always
R2. And I don't think that any interactions with characters or events really shapes Luke's development overall, because it's all so jarringly out of place and like temporary that I don't, at least without reading Dark Empire 2 and going on beyond here, I don't remember any lasting effects really from his supposed fall to the dark side. Do you?
Not really. I remember some references in the Jedi Academy trilogy, which is coming up for us very soon. But yeah, he basically got a taste of the power and I don't know, shook himself out of it and was like, that's too much. But that's the biggest thing we got out of Luke for this.
But his whole reasoning for turning to the dark side was dumb, and it happened way too quick in the comic pacing. It was like one page, I'm the hero. Next page, oh sure, I'll work for you, Palpy.
Right. No, you're right. It's but Luke does have some good interactions with Palpatine here, but he's just not the Luke what we see up to this point, especially now with the Thrawn trilogy in context, does not match up with this Luke. And it's very clear that they just wrote this like after seeing Return of the Jedi, and they're like, well, we have this idea of Luke going bad. And it's like, okay, flesh that out. And it's like, well, probably not fleshed out.
He doesn't even really have a chance to like grow in the Force, really, because so much of that happened off screen / before the book started, when he gained all of those powers he showed at the battle on Coruscant. I guess he learned to control a Force storm with Leia, but that's kind of pushing it.
That's right. I will mention, Mike, some of the imagery from the covers on this, I think is very long lasting. I feel like people recognize these, even that haven't maybe read this. This was the first thing in Star Wars to have the kind of the painting covers, if you know what I'm talking about, with the characters on them. And on the cover of this, Luke is in his Vader Dracula get up with his green lightsaber and the world devastators in the background destroying the planet. And I think a lot of people are familiar with that image. And then the back image has a lot of things with Han and Palpatine and stuff on it, and Leia and the droids and Chewie, of course. But I mentioned that because every book going forward started having these sort of movie poster 70s and 80s like characters painted on the front look. So that's something that came out of this too.
So our last question, would Luke's experiences in this story make him different than the Luke we met in The Last Jedi? Yes, absolutely. Because, he spent time, serving the dark side in this story. I think the only connection we can draw between Last Jedi Luke and Dark Empire Luke is they use the same Force trick. What do you think?
Yeah, which I like a lot. So you said Rian Johnson referenced this directly. Did someone ask him on Twitter about it, or? So
I don't think it was Dark Empire necessarily, but I remember he posted a picture in one of those books that was written as just like really ancillary materials, like a fake Jedi training text, and it talked about using like a certain Force ability to project yourself across the galaxy, which I think was inspired by Dark Empire.
That makes sense.
But we'll ask him. We're Twitter buddies with him.
Yeah, let's ask him for real. And ask him about that Walker imagery and how he turned it to be a lot more Jedi-like. Which, knowing Luke in the context of the story, it makes more sense. Him spending 6 days with Palpatine's holocron and then coming out and pulling down a Walker. Well, that makes more sense with the idea that I guess he was turning to the dark side that whole time. The 6 days of reading up on Palpatine's holocrons. Also, Mike, I got to mention that Palpatine says he has dark journals. So what are the dark journals of Palpatine? My
question.
Dark journals. Yeah, like Palpatine being a little emo in his room, I guess. Something like that. So Luke read a lot of that, which was a mistake. So Palpatine's texts. But, interesting in that way. That's actually my favorite part of this is the Luke and R2 interactions in the audiobook at the beginning.
So your favorite part of the Dark Empire comic was not in the comic. Sweet.
I guess not. I assumed it was always there because, we get more of Luke in the audiobook, I guess, than the comic.
That's funny. That'll do it for our walk through Dark Empire. It is an entertaining read. If you can track it down on your Comixologies or Kindle stores or whatever.
It's on Marvel Unlimited as well.
Okay, cool. We are going to do a new segment today. And I don't have a sound clip ready, so I'll just do my best impression here. I will make it canon. We're each going to pick something from Dark Empire which is a legend story that we want to see made canon again. We had the idea to do this back when we were doing the Thrawn trilogy, because obviously Thrawn has been made canon through Rebels, and there are other smaller pieces of legends that have been brought back, like Nogri, or even the character of Rook, but he was different in Rebels than how he's presented in the books. So we're each going to pick something we want to see canon, or want to see something made canon, and then I threw this on at the last second. Is there something from canon we would like to remove, or something from Legends we never want to see made canon? So let's start with the good things we want to see again. Jesse, you want to go first?
Sure. From this story, I think it's what I just mentioned. I would like to see Luke find one of Palpatine's dark side nooks, or whatever you want to call it, caves on Coruscant, and the emotions and the things he learns there, the way he deals with it, maybe the way, the way we see that. And I don't, kind of how like Luke's going around the galaxy in canon right now, or we're led to believe that, looking at Jedi temples and stuff. I would like to see him find one of Palpatine's dark side places, and
That's
what
cool.
he does with that.
Yeah.
And not the way he did it in this story. Not being mesmerized, vampire glamored into just sitting there for 6 days. But something else. He responds to it in a more interesting way. And other than that, I like elements of the World Devastators. I will say that. I like the idea of the Empire bringing terraforming ships to destroy a planet. Maybe it'd be executed a little differently.
Yeah, but I'll give it that a pass just because of that Rogue Squadron nostalgia. I'm cool with that.
Okay, yeah. So that's probably it for me.
So the thing from Dark Empire I want to see more of in canon is Nar Shaddaa, or Nar Shaddaa, however you want to say it. We've gotten a little bit in the Marvel run of comics. We've talked a little bit about it. I think that the Mandalorian is going to be a great chance to explore that sort of underworld. So you're not tied to the story of good versus evil. It's the lone gunfighter on the fringes of the galaxy. It would make total sense for him to need to go, to the Hutt's hangout to either go on a mission or get information or whatever. But just exploring, how it's sort of like a mini Coruscant. It's a giant, it's a moon that's sort of been built over into a giant city.
Right.
And I also think just the name, the Starlight Intruder, is either like one of the coolest spaceship names or some band in the 80s was missing out on a sweet band name.
I love it. No, I think more Nar Shaddaa in canon would be incredible because really cool it's mentioned here, and this kind of a jumping off point onward because you guys were going to, spoiler, we're going to come back to Nar Shaddaa and a lot of legend stuff. The Jedi Knight games and the Dark Forces games that came right after that spent a lot of time on Nar Shaddaa. This was clearly something that they actually worked out pretty well and the old legends, and it's come back pretty strong. It was also featured in the Knights of the Old Republic games. So I'm interested to see more of the Smuggler's Moon because you're right. It's a piratey, smuggler criminal version of Coruscant, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. So let's take things the other way. Is there anything from canon that you wish could be removed, or is there anything from Legends that you just don't want to ever see made canon?
Well, just strictly from this story, something I don't want to see made canon is Palpatine's essence jumping around bodies. Especially the idea of, like you said, creepy. Palpatine wanting to go into Leia's kids' bodies. That's creepy too. So I probably don't want that just because it's a little too, the sci-fi fantasy lines are way too messy there. And it's just, I know Star Wars has got a lot of fantastical fantasy stuff with the Force, but that seems like a stretch for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm going to sort of jump off of that because I was going to say I don't want to see clones of the Emperor, or really, I don't want to see clones again. I'm fine with how clones were used in the Clone Wars era.
Yeah.
That's great. But cloning main characters like Palpatine or Luke that we saw in the Thrawn trilogy, no. I do not want to see clones outside of clone trooper canon fodder. So I agree with you there because that just, nobody's ever really dead. There's always a clone of them somewhere out there.
Yeah, and I'll draw distinctions. Like I personally like maybe the idea of somebody like Maul losing a part of his body but keeping himself alive with the dark side of the Force till he gets medical attention and things like that. But someone being actually dead, fully dead, and then like their spirit jumping around, clones. Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah,
no thanks.
And since I jumped off of your point with that, I'll go ahead and give another thing I don't want to see canon, and I'm going to stick to Dark Empire. These Force Storm wormhole things. It just feels too sci-fi and abstract. And part of the reason I say that is I feel like thanks to Star Wars Rebels, we have actually gotten a lot closer to something like this possibly becoming canon, because Rebels showed us basically bending space-time with the world between worlds. The Bendu was sort of a Force being who turned into a storm that I actually really didn't like in Rebels. But we're getting sort of sci-fi and mystical with some of these manifestations of the Force. Some of them are okay, some of them are not, but just a giant Force storm in space that destroys fleets, I don't think we need to see that in canon. So
you would probably remove that from the canon then, the Bendu Force Storm and stuff?
I don't know if I'd go as far as removing the Bendu, because I mean, I like they got Tom Baker to do the voice and stuff.
Yeah,
but like the first couple of times we saw the Bendu were okay, but just the way the story with the Bendu finished out was weird, and I didn't like it. I don't know that I would remove it. I just want them to be careful on these ways they manifest the Force going forward.
All right. Well, I like this. Well, we will return to this segment in the future, guys, because there's a lot to talk about with this.
Yeah. And you're probably listening to this the day after Thanksgiving. Don't listen to us on Thanksgiving. Go hang out with your family. It's one of the days that the calendar forces you to hang out with them. But hopping off of the Halloween segment we did a couple weeks ago, we wanted to do a little Star Wars Thanksgiving or Life Day segment. We're not going to talk about the holiday special. A lot of other great podcasts have done that recently. But we are going to just do our best to address the question real quick. What would the main characters be thankful for? What would be the thing that they choose they are thankful for the most? And okay. I have some ideas, but we haven't discussed this off air, so this should be fun.
Yeah. So let's start with Luke, Mike. What do you think Luke is thankful for? We can go back and forth, but what sort of things?
So I think Luke would probably be most thankful for R2 running away from the Lars family moisture farm, because if he didn't, he would have died with Owen and Beru and never left, which is sort of addressed in the novelization of The Last Jedi. He has a flashback to what if he'd never left Tatooine, if he'd never gotten involved. But instead of living a quiet life as a farmer, he likely would have died when the stormtroopers showed up to take the droids. So I think Luke is thankful for R2's adventurous spirit.
Even though it leads to a little dark stuff. Yeah. His family dying and his hero's journey being shoved into that. I think Luke would probably be thankful for, piggybacking off of that, his guidance from Obi-Wan and Yoda, and how it taught him to be a better person, a better Jedi, and, give him vision for the future to the best he could do it. And I also think he would be thankful for his family unit. So I say that a lot on the show because Luke didn't know his parents, was raised by his aunt and uncle. His aunt and uncle die. He's raised by his mentor. His mentor dies. And then he has this adopted family unit with Han and Leia, literally family with Leia, we finds out later. The droids, Chewbacca, and eventually Lando. And they kind of have this like unique family going on. And I think Luke cares about all of them so much. So I think he would be thankful for that new family unit that moves forward.
Yeah. Okay. So what about Leia? I'm having a hard time coming up with something that beyond the obvious for Leia. You got anything?
I mean, maybe Leia would be thankful for her dad and his involvement in politics and the rebellion and him pushing her a little bit in that direction, maybe. And then obviously she ran with it in her own complete different way. And she has to endure a lot of tragedy in her life with Alderaan and the rebellion, but it ends up making her become the strong leader she is. And obviously I think she's thankful for Luke and Han because, she keeps them in line. Right. She keeps them in line. Han's her husband, Luke's her brother. She keeps them in line, but they all support each other in unique ways. And, she's pretty awesome. So
I've got it. And you sort of led me to it. Leia is thankful that she was not born a boy because Bale said that he and his wife always wanted a daughter. And Obi-Wan and Yoda were like, great, you take her. We're going to send this boy to the crappy place on Tatooine. So
she can stick her up in royalty on Alderaan, most beautiful planet ever. Yeah.
I think that's pretty good.
No, that's actually one of my favorite things about Leia is I love that she's been raised by royalty and politicians, and she turns out the way she does. I like that a lot.
Yeah, so let's move on to Han. I think Han when he looks at his life, he will be most thankful that Lando had such outlandish fashion choices. Because if Lando wasn't wearing that Tommy Bahama shirt at the end of Solo, he wouldn't have seen the cards hidden up his sleeve and never would have gotten the Falcon.
Man, you're doing a deep cut here, Mike. Yeah. I'm thinking, yeah, definitely. And would say,
because if Han doesn't get the Falcon, he's never the Han Solo that we know. So when he happened to see that up Lando's sleeve, you could either say it's because of Lando's fashion choices or how much Chewie scared Lando at that one moment. But either way, if those events don't happen and Han doesn't catch Lando cheating, he never ends up with the Falcon. So I'm going to go with Han being... he would never tell Leia to his face that he was more thankful he got the Falcon than her, but I think he would absolutely think it privately.
I think Han's the same way with Luke too, right? Like I think Han views Luke as a brother, but it's hard for him to say that sometimes. I think Han would be thankful for Chewbacca because Chewie is a better person than Han. You know what I mean? And and I think Chewie saves Han's life more than Han saved Chewie's life. And
that's probably true.
The camaraderie they have and the balancing act they have going on and the co-pilot pilot and how they both get wrapped up into the rebellion and end up being great leaders and, mission runners for the rebellion. I think Han would be grateful for Chewie and obviously the life debt and Chewie's family, which we will see in the future. Han's pretty invested with Chewie's family. They're like a second family to him. So maybe that.
Yeah, that's good. What about Chewie?
Well, Chewie, we've talked about Chewie a lot, how he doesn't get enough screen time. He does get more in some of the Legends books, which I really like. I think Chewie is thankful for Han. Like I was saying, Han's thankful for Chewie, but I think it's because what Han opens up Chewie to, like the world of smuggling and then the Rebel Alliance, and eventually Han and Luke and Leia's families, and how Chewie kind of becomes the awesome grandpa of those families, which we'll see later. And, we've seen some of that just through Chewie's expressions in canon with the sequels. I think Chewie and Ben Solo had a thing, and it makes it even more tragic when, spoiler alert, Kylo kills Han and Chewie has to bear witness to it, because I think Chewie loved Ben just as much, you know what I mean? But I think Chewie's thankful for that family unit, maybe. I don't know. Clearly, because Chewie's left his own family for them.
Yeah.
Like his people. He's left his people.
Well, Chewie loved Ben Solo like you love your dog that has puppies, because let's face it, Han Solo was like Chewie's third pet because of the difference in lifespans or whatever. I'm going to go with Chewie is thankful that he's a big Wookiee and never has to go down to the gun pods of the Millennium Falcon. He's like, sorry, Han, I just don't fit. So you have to go down there or send some of these other cannon fodder people down there for you to smash into asteroids. I'll stay up here and fly.
That's true. I also think Chewie's thankful for the custom chair Han had designed for him.
True. Yes, exactly.
All right. So that leads us right into the man, the myth, the legend, Lando Calrissian. What would Lando be thankful for that's not too conceited or just money focused?
Well, that's paradoxical because Lando is often so conceited.
That's okay though. He likes our heroes a lot. He just doesn't always show it. Well, we see a change in Lando Return of the Jedi onward, right, Mike? So that might be part of this too. Lando gets given a lot of command in canon and in Legends. So what do we think he thinks about that?
I think he's just thankful for capes.
Yeah, definitely thankful for capes. Oh, there it is. He's thankful that the Alliance could have a semi-formal cape commissioned for him to go with his general outfit. Yeah. That cape that's a little less outlandish, it's a little subdued, but it's still got a little blue tint to it. And when everyone else is in khaki.
Perfect. And another thing Lando's probably thankful for is that he's going to be in episode 9. I don't think a lot of people, once he wasn't in 7, I don't think people thought we'd see him again.
I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I am too. So the last one, the droids, R2
Yes.
and 3PO. What are they most thankful for? I'm going to start with 3PO.
Okay.
And it's not the red arm that I think he's most thankful for.
Why?
I think he's most thankful that Luke took R2 away on this journey to Octu, and he finally got a break of R2 pushing him around.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I think we're going to keep consistent with how we've been talking through this whole thing, Mike. Me talking through the sentiment, you talking through the jokes. I think 3PO is most thankful for R2, even though R2 bugs the crap out of him. It's like this interesting dynamic they have. I do not think they can live without each other, even though R2 might not want to admit it. 3PO cannot live without R2. I mean, he can be separate from him, but say R2 died, I don't know how 3PO would survive. It's like, you know what I mean? They are a balancing act with each other. So I think 3PO is thankful for R2 most of all, but I really think 3PO is thankful for Luke taking the steps. You're right, bringing them in from the Jawas, and obviously I'd like to think 3PO is thankful for the responsibilities he's given in Legends and in canon with Leia, with the politics stuff, with the diplomacy stuff. He's kind of fulfilling his purpose in the highest level.
Yeah. One other thing I'll just add, I think R2 is thankful that he told the R5 unit on the Queen starship to go over there, because that dude exploded right away and R2 managed to make it off of Naboo in episode 1.
Yeah, I've heard those fan theories that while that droid was powered down, R2's putting a device in him to make him short circuit.
That seems a little more chopper than R2, but I could maybe get behind it.
Yeah, I could get behind that. I think R2 is very thankful for 3PO, but I really think he's thankful for Luke. Him and Luke have a really unique relationship, and I think we realize that more and more as us going back through Legends and in canon. They spend nonstop time together, and that actually makes that moment in The Last Jedi even better, which is one of my all-time favorite moments in The Last Jedi and in Star Wars. Their little moment they share on the Falcon. They've got years together, Mike, years. And and obviously now R2 has overclocked Luke's X-Wing. So there's that.
And that'll do it for our Life Day segment here, Thanksgiving for the main cast. We're thankful that so many of you have picked up our show and started listening. We've only been doing this since the end of July, and without getting too specific, a lot of great things have happened. So thank you to everybody who's listened and clicked and downloaded and all that stuff. And sticking with that theme, we're going to read a couple reviews.
That's right. So once again, you guys that are leaving us reviews at home, we're going to keep reading these on the show. Thank you so much for these. They're pretty fun. So I will start with a review from Jennifer 7788. Fun show is the title. I like this show so far. I'm learning things about Star Wars that I never knew. And that's it. And you know what, Mike? That's kind of my life goal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's a short review, but that was one of your explicit goals from the beginning. So, hey, we're doing something right.
Yeah, my goals was to have people listen to the show that don't want to commit time to all these books and stuff, but they still get the main story of Luke in these and the main story of these books and our little things that are in the recesses of our mind that somehow Mike and I know, and we pull those out, as long as it's fun and entertaining for you guys. That's all I care.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and I'll read the next one. And this ties back to our intro to the show today. Hot Takes Ahead by Tay Janea. If I got your name wrong, I'm sorry. Jesse and Mike are doing a great job of really analyzing and evaluating one of the hottest topics in Star Wars fandom, the character of Luke Skywalker. The show provides a lot of great recommendations for fans who want to dive deeper than the films, including books and games. Co-host Mike has some hot takes and isn't afraid to drop the hammer. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then this next part I absolutely agree with, while Jesse provides the sex appeal.
Man. All right. There we go. I'm speechless.
There's a reason I make him use video Skype calls when we do these episodes, even though it's not absolutely necessary.
Yeah, the
But,
Kenobi appeal.
Yeah,
We'll call it that.
Tejane and I get it.
Well, I like this person. That they had some great things to say here, Mike. I would agree. We have some deep dives, hot takes, and hopefully some sex appeal, I guess. So there we go.
You know, I like to think that some of these hot takes I'm putting out there, other Star Wars fans are thinking they're just a little too scared to say them because of how people might react. Like, oh man, what if I actually say I don't like something about Star Wars? Are people gonna jump all over me? It's okay. I'll take the hit for you.
There you go. I still love Dave Filoni. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that out of fear, Mike. I'll correct you. I actually like Dave Filoni a lot. So.
I like a lot of what he's done too.
Yeah, and I think you like him and what he's doing for Star Wars. It's just some of the things that.
Sure. Let's go ahead and close out the show. We have some more big news. We have a website now. So if you go to thecanoncantina.com, this has links to all of our social media, which those have all been rebranded. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, it's all The Canon Cantina. We've got a page where you can listen to the show there as well. And if you go check out the website, you can see some of what we have planned for the future. I'm not going to reveal it too much on here, but go check out the website, thecanoncantina.com, and get a glimpse of some of the things that we are building for you all.
Yeah, the website is going to continue to grow, and we appreciate you guys sharing it with people. You can always find us at all the places we mentioned before at The Canon Cantina, and we appreciate you guys that are joining those places. Our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they continue to grow. The Discord as well, right, Mike?
Yeah.
So if you guys haven't joined our Discord, join that as well. We got some good conversations going. But most importantly, help spread the word of our show by subscribing, rating, and reviewing. I will read your review on the show, and Mike will read review, and you guys are already leaving us some really funny ones.
Yeah,
if you think we do something better.
I think the bar has been raised for reviews at this point. So let's see if we can get more entertaining.
Yeah. And if you think we can do something better, or just something you want to talk to us about or recommend for the show, email us at canoncantina@gmail.com. And next week, guys, we're going to go right back into Marvel. So if you guys remember, we did the Harbinger episode. We're going into the next grouping of Marvel comics, and that is Yoda's Secret War.
That's right. We'll talk about Yoda's Secret War and hopefully have some other big announcements next week. Thanks for joining us here in the Canon Cantina, everybody. Cheers.
May the Force be with you.
Boring conversation anyway.